Yeah, this review is a little late as I have been working on videos of the intriguing lore and backstory of this game, as well as a big super secret video I am soon to announce. But I think it should be pretty obvious by now that I really love Bloodborne. In fact, I think it's safe to say it is one of my favorite games of all time, right up there with Dark Souls and Silent Hill. While I bet you $1 million that I don't have that The Witcher 3 is going to get Game of the Year, I think Bloodborne deserves it more. Why? I'll explain through the entirety of this review. But it's one of my favorite games because it takes Dark Souls' formula and adds the cult brings the monsters story from Silent Hill. It's the best of both worlds, and it's set in a dark fantasy universe inspired by Europe in the 1300s, Lovecraft, and old school horror. Also, the main man behind Dark Souls, Hidetaka Miyazaki, is also behind this game. Not Yui, his evil twin. He's too busy screwing up Dark Souls 2 even more now with Scholar of the First Sin. But Bloodborne. It's as refreshing as a mist of cold blood dew. To start you off, I'll say, if you love Dark Souls, chances are you'll love Bloodborne too. And if you're wondering where the game fits in the Souls universe, it doesn't. No, it's not a spiritual Demon Souls 2, and it's not in the same universe as Demon Souls. It's its entirely own universe. I just wanted to make that clear, but I think most people know that by now. Bloodborne is a dark fantasy horror action RPG that focuses more on horror and action than RPG. It's riddled with werewolves, beasts, witches, Cthulhu-like creatures, celestial beings, and the like. Its story is based around a curse brought on by consuming old blood that was tainted. And if you're thinking, what? Who's drinking blood? Everyone. Blood is thought of as an elixir in this universe. The game's atmosphere is extremely spooky, and does well in its symbolisms of death and plague via the sheer amount of tombstones, coffins, and graves found everywhere. You are born into this world, signed into a contract as a hunter, one who must cleanse the streets of the beasts and monsters that resulted from this curse. Unaffected survivors hold themselves up indoors, burning incense that wards off the beasts, and the townsfolk patrol the streets hunting beasts, unaware they have started to turn themselves, and it's your job to cleanse the streets and eventually find the source of the curse and end the nightmare. Oh, that sounded pretty cool. The story is told in a very Lovecraftian way, where not all the answers are given outright.
You're sure to be in a fine haze about now, but don't think too hard about all of this.
And there's a very strong influence from what are called the Great Ones, who are celestial beings that transcend time and space, and people worship them for their insight, blood, and mysterious nature. The Great Ones appear to have many eyes, causing worshippers to believe they are all-seeing and all-knowing. Worshippers want to ascend to their level, and go about consuming blood and insight to hopefully be kindled and chosen by them for the coming of the New Age. Be they gods, aliens, or something else entirely, there is still something very ominous about them, which makes every encounter with them very intense. The story is very deep and relies heavily on inference, focusing more on the gameplay, as I feel a game should do. Bloodborne has the exact same formula as Dark Souls in every way. Instead of souls, you gain points as blood echoes. Instead of humanity and effigy, you consume insight and don't hollow when you die. Insight allows for assistance from other players online. Insight also makes the game slightly harder. The more you have of it, the more attacks some enemies and bosses will use. Instead of soapstones, you have bells. Ring the large bell to bring someone into your world. Ring the small bell to go into someone else's world. You can leave messages via messengers and read other people's mostly helpful messages. There are still blood pools brought by the messengers that allow you to examine how people died to avoid risky situations. There are lanterns which serve as bonfires, but you can't sit at them to restore all your health and reset the world. You have to go back to the Hunter's Dream, which is a place that serves as the nexus in Demon Souls. In the Hunter's Dream, you can level up, upgrade your weapons, and buy items, or even use the doll, should it please you.
Let me stand close. Now shut your eyes.
And also gain more direction on where you have to go. What's new is the Blood Gem crafting system that allows you to put additional stats on your weapons. There are also runes, which aren't available right away, and they act as rings did in Dark Souls. And there is a slot for an oath, which determines your covenant. And there are only 3 known covenants in the game, and they don't have much of an impact on the story or gameplay. So, as you can plainly see, the formula in the gameplay for the Souls series is still intact for Bloodborne, and fans should jump in with ease, while newcomers will definitely have no problem jumping in and learning the ropes. It's much easier and slightly less cryptic to understand, being the most newcomer-friendly Souls game yet. What Souls fans were most concerned about were the replacement of shields with guns, but it's not a very big change and it's not that bad. It allows for faster paced combat. Guns normally don't do a whole lot of damage unless you're going for that build, which has its many drawbacks, so it's obvious their purpose is to parry attacks and do what is called a visceral attack, and rip their guts out for massive damage. Also, when locked on, you'll strafe around the enemy, which also allows for faster combat and just looks cooler than rolling around like a ninny. Overall, the combat is much faster and stamina isn't as much of a hurdle as the Souls games. Another change from the old Souls formula that I like is the way backstabs work. In the past 3 Souls games, someone could simply circle around you and backstab you for massive critical damage, and it felt really cheap, especially when those stabs appear to be lag advantageous. In Bloodborne, you'll have to do a super attack on their backside by holding down the R2 button. If you can pull this off, you can backstab. It requires more skill than just circling around the enemy and feels more rewarding as it is more of a challenge to pull off. And there is noticeably less lag in my PvP encounters than my PvP encounters in the past Souls games. But every game has its lag and there are still people playing on 1 megabit connections. But they always end up being jackasses when they win, like it was fair game. They're jackasses. Don't even message them. Just don't even. Just let it be, let it lie. It's better that way. People were also a little let down to hear about the removal of magic in this game, but that's not completely true. There is magic originating from the celestial beings or special/tainted blood, but it doesn't work the way you'd expect. There's arcane and elemental blood attacks that both use quicksilver bullets when used. Yes, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, bullets converting to magic, but the quicksilver bullets basically serve as MP. It seems fairly difficult to pull off a good magic build as you need to equip a lot of runes and it uses a lot of bullets which have a cap. From Software realized this issue with the bullet system and implemented a feature that allows you to sacrifice a little health for a 5 bullet boost, and it is very helpful. The graphics are, simply put, amazing. So good. There is so much detail, which is great for a game like this, requiring lots of extra exploration. The game runs at 1080p and 30 frames per second. A majority of gamers may think 30 frames per second is inadequate, but I think it works just fine. Also, and this is huge, Ragdoll's and breakable object physics are back, which is definitely a welcome re-edition. That was the most disappointing removal in Dark Souls 2. It's Yui's fault. The enemy and boss designs are simply amazing. They are the best designed creatures I have ever seen, with so much unforgiving detail, with so many appendages and tentacles and eyeballs and hair follicles and antenna and fangs and things I cannot even explain. It definitely makes the initial encounters much more terrifying as you want to understand the creature's anatomy, but are too busy figuring out the attack patterns and avoiding death. The boss fights are beyond epic, and I attribute half of that to the amazing and bombastic live orchestra compositions. Bloodborne's bosses causes an adrenaline rush like no other boss fight in the past Souls games. And even after fighting the same boss time and time again, that rush is still there. It's exhilarating, it's fast-paced, it's great, and the feeling of beating a boss that felt almost impossible, that satisfaction, it's phenomenal. The game is fairly difficult to newcomers to the formula, but Soul Series fans will likely not struggle too much until New Game Plus. Yes, there is a New Game Plus, and it is unforgiving. Unfortunately, nothing changes besides the difficulty, and all you get is a new weapon. Beyond New Game Plus, you basically just start the game over again on the first New Game Plus's difficulty, which is disappointing. There's definitely a lack of incentive to replay the game after you beat it, other than to relive the amazing experience and see all the well-designed areas, monsters, and bosses again. That's incentive. Oh, and then there's the lore. There's a deep historical lore built into the game, and piecing it together is fun. But it's very obscure, and the game doesn't give you nearly as much detail to go on as other Souls games, as there are less item descriptions and less NPCs to give you more to the story. So there's a lot more to speculate. But speculation is not my thing. I mean, theories can go just completely wild. But looking at the overabundant themes of H.P. Lovecraft and Victorian era horror and digging a little deeper into the influences will help you understand the lore a little bit more. But I love the ambiguity and I love the way the game tells its story. It's unlike any other game. I hate to say it, but I think it's about time that From Software start adding more scripted events and lip syncing for realism. It's strange to be staring at a guy talking to you without even seeing his lips move. While this was okay in Dark Souls, as most people wore helmets and armor and you couldn't see their faces, it's not okay in Bloodborne. With all the things building up the realism, that tiny little subtle detail kills it. What expands upon the game and adds countless replay value if you're into dungeon crawlers with moot rewards, being mostly low-level runes and high-level blood gems in which you can attach to your person and weapons respectively, are the Chalice Dungeons. It's tied to the lore in a really lazy way, just to give it some meaning. But it was first and foremost designed to add hours of gameplay in a game where New Game Plus doesn't expand much. It is possible to play these cooperatively, but the downside is the summons do not get the progress achievements or special items. So that kills the incentive to actually cooperate unless you're really bored. Most people will find themselves dungeon crawling alone or with friends, or the bored Randys. The upside is that there are a few enemies and bosses in the Chalice Dungeons that aren't anywhere in the main game, acting as an entirely new experience. I do recommend waiting on the Chalice Dungeons until after you beat the game and start a New Game Plus, as the difficulty of the dungeons are unaffected by that, and that way it's a little easier to progress and more challenging towards the last of the essential dungeons. You may need help, and if so, ring your large bell. Some bored Randy may join to help you out. The root Chalice Dungeons are randomly generated, allowing for a new experience for every new dungeon you go through, and you can go online and find and play other people's dungeons if you're bored, like a bored Randy. Personally, I hated the dungeons. They could be repetitive, punishing, and frustrating. There's very little incentive to doing them other than trophies, and it just sucks. I wish they spent that time they spent on the dungeons fleshing out the main game with more weapons, detail, and areas, or adding new bosses and enemies in New Game Plus, just doing something more to the actual main game. Like any game, there are downsides, and my biggest complaint with the game is the sheer lack of variety. It's very underwhelming in content when you compare it to a Souls game. There's less variety in character builds, items, outfits, and weapons, and because of this, there's less lore in the item descriptions, making it a harder game to decipher the story, to which it can be a good thing and a bad thing. Because of the lack of variety in weapons and outfits, time and time again you'll encounter another player dressed exactly like you with the same weapon as you, making you feel pretty unoriginal. People have actually resorted to using no armor or the Beast Claw and Cannon to be more original, but even that starts to get unoriginal after a while. On the same subject, armor doesn't make a significant difference in New Game Plus, so you can pretty much wear whatever satisfies you. Even the doll's armor, should it please you.
Tell me, Hunter, could this be joy?
All the weapons seem equally balanced, which is definitely nice. It's a nice change from Dark Souls 2. No matter which weapon you choose, you will do just fine. The starting weapon, the axe, is one of the best weapons in the game because of its power-up R2 attack, which allows for 3 simultaneous hits, but I prefer the saw weapons, namely the saw spear, as they have a fast attack speed and most enemies can be killed before they can even get an attack in. Same goes with the Beast Claw, which some people say is a Chalice Dungeon only weapon, but I bought it through the shop in New Game Plus, so I don't know what they're talking about. There are a total of 17 right-hand weapons and 11 left-hand weapons, and only 20 total are worth using. That's not a lot. Bloodborne is really dumbed down in content, but makes up for that fault in sheer quality. Luckily, due to the high sales, there is also an expansion confirmed for Bloodborne that should be making its way to us later this year. I hope it adds at least 3 new weapons and outfits, new areas and bosses. That would be amazing. If it doesn't live up to my expectations, I will be unsatisfied. I seriously just hope it's not another Chalice Dungeon. Oh god, no. Side note, Dark Souls 3 was confirmed recently, which I'm sure will kick ass. So, in ending, I hope this review convinced you to buy the game if you haven't already, or was just entertaining to watch. It really is an amazing and original game with some great challenges. It's fun and fast-paced. It makes any other combat system in any other game seem too slow after playing. Going back to Dark Souls after this feels cumbersome and takes some time getting adjusted to. And if you think that's bad, go back to Kingsfield, the spiritual predecessor. You'll get a kick out of the pacing of that game. Overall, Bloodborne's rewarding and fun, feeding your curiosity with plenty of eldritch areas to explore and intricately designed monsters and boss battles that amp you up with the amazing live orchestra. And as I end this review, I implore you to check out my spoiler-free No BS Beginner's Guide to Bloodborne if you'd like to know more and see more. Or if you've already played this game to a great extent and would like to hear more about the amazing lore this game has to offer, well, by all means, watch my Bloodborne lore series of videos in this playlist. You won't regret it. You will have a deeper understanding. You will gain so much insight your brain will just explode.
Ah, cos. Or some say cosm.